Hi everybody, many thanks for joining us in today's webinar series co-organized by InCorp Group, a pan-Asia corporate services provider with presence in 6 countries in Asia. Orissa International, Southeast Asia focused market research firm with presence in 6 Southeast Asian countries. This webinar series is also supported by our partners, which includes Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Action Community for Entrepreneurship in Singapore, as well as many other network partners in the region. So today marks the end of our webinar series that has started since June 2nd, of which this webinar series had already covered key Asian markets that includes India, Philippines, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Vietnam. So obviously for today's session, we will be Singapore focused. We will cover the Singapore market in terms of exploring business strategies and expanding to Singapore for foreign companies or foreign entrepreneurs out there, or even for Singaporeans who are looking at setting up their first business in Singapore. So today's topics we will briefly cover economic overview of Singapore's market. We will cover key industrial or commercial sectors in the country, regulations that may impact or as a consideration for your market entry. How do you set up to establish a presence in Singapore? A little bit over the taxation regime in Singapore as well. What are some of the government support and grants available in Singapore? So the speakers for today's session will be myself. I'm Eric here. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer of InCorp Group. We also have Dahlia Nava, a trade consultant of Orissa International. So the format of today's session will start off with Dahlia presenting the macro overview of Singapore and its key sectors, as well as business strategies, and myself coming in with the second presentation, which I will cover all other aspects to Singapore in terms of setting up taxation, government support, as well as how do you establish a presence here in Singapore. At any one time, you can post the questions in the Q&A tab in this webinar, which you can see in the this webinar tool here, and our staff will be answering your key questions live as we speak. So post the session, we will also be sending everyone an email of a recording of this webinar with the link on YouTube, as well as our contact points so that you can reach out to us directly and start the conversation. So one thing to note on the technical side, in case you face audio difficulties during this webinar, right, please navigate to the dashboard. You can see this tab called the audio tab. Select and the computer audio tab. If it's already selected, choose the no audio first, and then reselect the computer audio again. So this should fix the issue if there is an issue. So I look forward to presenting to you in the second presentation, as well as answering some of the questions in the last 10 minutes of this whole webinar, of which we will answer or open up to the floor for Q&A sessions. So without further ado, I will pass on the mic to Dahlia for self-introduction, as well as starting her presentation.
Thanks, Eric, for the quick introduction. Thank you so much for everyone joining this webinar. It's the last webinar as mentioned by Eric. So we really appreciate you joining us throughout this whole series of webinar. Like I said, my name is Dahlia. I am from Orissa International, and I'm a trade consultant there. So today I'll just be going through a bit about doing business in Singapore and sharing about key market strategies, route to market, as well as key industry sectors that you might want to really consider looking at. So here's a quick introduction about who we are. We are a market entry consulting firm, and we're headquartered here in Singapore, but we have offices throughout Southeast Asia. Now, what is really unique about us is that we have a lot of experience, mainly because we've done a lot of projects with companies over the past 20+ years. And because of that, we've done so many projects within certain sectors, and we've had a strong track record in guiding these companies into Southeast Asia. These are some of our core services. We provide distributor and end user search. We've done a lot of market research for some of our companies who wanted to really understand the market before they go into it. And we have our new market immersion program, which is a lead generation program, which helps companies really understand the go-to-market strategy and at the same time get in-market support from us. Here are some of our Southeast Asian country offices. In total, we have about 30 staff separated into two departments, one in market research and the other in trade. So the trade department actually focuses a lot on distributor searches and conducting business matching meetings for some of our clients. Here are some of our government clients. As you can see, most of them are from North America, Europe, and Asia, and they refer a lot of their companies to us. And it's mainly because of our strong and long track record in helping companies grow in Southeast Asia. Here are some of our corporate clients. As you can see, we've done a lot of projects with companies across aerospace, agriculture, industrial, medical, and even to FMCG sectors as well. So going straight into where to do business. So unlike other countries, Singapore is actually pretty small, but we've actually created a very strategic environment for industries to really set up their shop, either locating themselves near industrial parks or locating themselves near research institutes. So I'll just go through the whole map and just focus on certain areas. So as you can see in the northern gateway, it really consists of a lot of companies in the new innovative sector. We have the Agri-Food Innovation Park over here and the Seletar Aerospace Park. So if you're looking into starting something in these particular industries, then this is the place that you might want to set up your office in. Secondly, we're looking at the East Gateway, which is very well known for our Changi Airport terminals. And recently, Terminal 5 is still going on in terms of their construction, and it's actually known to be a game changer for our competitiveness in the air hub, because the project is potentially could serve about 150 million passengers within the year. And moving to the Western Gateway, it's really our global maritime connectivity that's very focused around this area, and especially in Tuas. So speaking of Tuas, in 2021, we're looking into building a mega port near Tuas, and that will actually have a capacity to hold about 65 million 20-foot equivalent units of cargo, which is way more than we ever did before. And lastly, we're looking at the central area, which is very well known to a lot of our businesses here in Singapore as the CBD area. A lot of our financial districts are around this area, but not many people know that the Jurong Lake district is an upcoming second central business district, mainly because the KL terminus that is supposed to be built over here but is now postponed. But it's still a really good place to actually set up your business if you're looking to be strategically near the causeway points, which is here and in Tuas as well. So this is a very good destination for people who are looking to do business with Malaysia. Now, going into a snapshot of Singapore's GDP, it can be separated into two parts: goods producing industries and service producing industries. So in the manufacturing side, which is the largest sector right here, it actually contributes to about 20 to 25% of the country's annual GDP. Our manufacturing ecosystem really consists of companies in the EPC line, which is the engineering, procurement, and construction firm, as well as research institutes who really focus and work with a lot of companies directly here in Singapore to develop either innovative solutions or new technologies. A very good example is Fin Metal Singapore, who is among one of the growing number of electronic and electrical manufacturing companies that have actually set their regional base here and capitalized on the ecosystem, mainly because Singapore is known to be an ideal base not only to do business for their clients here, but in Southeast Asia as well. Looking at the service producing industries, the finance and insurance sector is pretty large as well. We have about 200 over banks here in Singapore, and we are a regional hub for many of the global financial services firms. Not to mention, our insurance industry is actually looking to adopting centralized blockchain platforms to allow efficient risk placements as well as creating a specialist insurance solutions. Lastly, I just want to touch on retail as well. Not many people know this, but a lot of the huge retail firms around the world are actually based here in Singapore with the same reason as the fact that we are a gateway to ASEAN. And because we have a 3.2 million middle class population, uh, our expenditure is expected to hit about 55 trillion by 2030. So with that being said, a lot of the MNC companies in retail are coming here to really tap on not just the Singapore population, but in ASEAN as well. Singapore is very well known to be one of the stable, most stable economies in the region, and it's mainly because of our employment rates and our steady GDP growth. But recently, because of our COVID-19 situation, it has taken quite a dip. But not to worry, because Singapore has recently announced that they secured 13 billion worth in terms of investment commitments across the next few years in sectors like electronics and infocom. So that in itself shows you that we're already generating growth, even when our economy is still currently in the COVID-19 new normal state. Speaking about COVID-19, so we don't have many community cases much anymore. And because of that, the government has already assured a lot of the businesses here that we are going into phase 2, which is easing of restrictions and going back to business operations as per normal. But of course, we need to take note about the fact that there's going to be a new normal situation in the later phases. Now, very key thing, why should companies consider doing business here in Singapore? There are many reasons, but I'll just focus into 3 main reasons. Yes, we have multiple FTAs, but the ease of using Singapore as a regional base to cover the region is really not highlighted enough. I think Singapore is one of the few countries in the world that we are so strategically placed that we can actually travel to places like Indonesia, Malaysia, or even Vietnam and Thailand for that matter, and still be able to do business within that day and still come back by the end of the day or by nightfall. And we don't really have to take into consideration of things like journey to the airport or traffic jams or even queues at immigration, because most of our immigration kiosks are already digital. With regards to hiring, Singapore has a highly educated and skilled workforce that is very proficient in English. And yes, our salaries are a lot higher than our other countries in the region, but our productivity and business culture is very aligned with the multinational companies, which is why we attract a lot of the headquarter jobs from the global Fortune 500 companies compared to our other Asian countries. And lastly, what people don't really know is that a lot of the companies that do business not only in Singapore but in Southeast Asia and even China for that matter, closing a deal is actually decided in the Singapore HQ base. So that's where many companies tend to have their regional HQ office here in Singapore. In fact, we have about 7,000 multinational companies operating here. And it's mainly because, number one, we have a very stable political environment. We have a highly skilled workforce, as I mentioned earlier, and our infrastructure is pretty sophisticated. Moving forward to the top 5 imports and top 5 exports, I'll just touch on a few industries here. The petrochemical industry is really attributed by numerous investments by global players within the industry, companies like Mitsui Chemicals and Shell. And the country itself has brought over 35 billion worth of revenue and investment into Singapore. And right now we have about 95 leading petrochemical companies here. Not to mention, we also play a very important role as a community hub, trading hub for Asia by bringing a lot of companies from around the world to Singapore so that we can help them facilitate trade. One thing good about our country is that because we have an open market and it's an open economy, we allow both foreign and local partners to come and be given a neutral playing field So there's no single producer or no consumer who can really dominate the market. It's really fair. As a global trading and distribution hub for electronics and semiconductors, Singapore, we've exported more about like 108 billion worth of semiconductors and electronic integrated circuits to the world. So that is a very good point. So if companies are looking to ride on the constant demand for electronics, especially consumer electronics around the world, then Singapore is the place to start with. Looking to our import sources and export destinations, I think it's pretty clear that China is our most promising partner for both cases, which is why we took a really huge hit when the COVID-19 outbreak happened. But not to worry, Singapore-China has recently agreed to launch a fast lane arrangement. So that means that a lot of our businesses here in Singapore are able to travel to China in certain provinces, of course, to facilitate essential travel for business and official purposes. Because both countries really understand that it's important to secure the connectivity of our production and supply chains, they're actually working towards leveling up their efficiency of freight links and making custom clearance a lot better to facilitate smooth flow of essential goods and services. So when you know where you want to set up your business, it's important which sector you want to really look into. So there are many sectors in Singapore, but we feel that these 5 sectors really show the most potential in doing business in the long run. In the ICT sector, we've posted a growth about 4.3%, which remains actually the strongest sectorial growth in 2019, early 2019. The growth of the ICT sector is really due to the fact that there's such a high demand now for services such as software development, web hosting, and even web portals and IT consultancy. Now, because of this COVID-19 situation, the government has also seen that this demand needs to be maintained. So they've actually supported a lot of the fintech companies here in Singapore with grants and initiatives amounting up to about 125 million in total to help these companies really secure a firm and strong position, not only for now, but for the future. And this also helps them create new business opportunities and innovate new products and solutions. Going on to the medtech sector, it's actually known that Singapore by 2030 is researched 1 out of 5 Singaporeans will actually be 65 years and older. So because of that, Singapore's healthcare market is really estimated to reach about 29.8 billion because of this aging population dilemma. But it's not a dilemma because there is an opportunity for medtech solution providers to come in and provide medical devices to organizations like hospitals and medical institutes here in Singapore. On top of that, we've got 60 multinational medtech firms here. A very good example is Biosensors, Becton Dickinson, Alcon, and even Hillrom. So there's a lot of increase as well in the investor side of things because a lot of investors now are looking to see to support early stage startups, especially in the deep tech side for medical. A lot of overseas companies are also looking to come to Asia to expand their business in terms of medtech, but they're using Singapore as a regional base because it's a lot more strategic. And since a lot of the medtech firms are based here, it's a lot easier to create that network and then expand further. In our aerospace sector, we've expanded in growth for 12% last year. And as it was supported and increased by the volume of repair and maintenance jobs from commercial airlines. On the regional front, Singapore has actually garnered a quarter of ASEAN's MRO market because we are backed by a pool of 100 aerospace companies, namely Rolls-Royce, Boeing, Honeywell, and many others. But locally, right, we also have a lot of big names in Singapore, SATS and Changi Airport Group. SATS specifically, Singapore's provider of food solutions and gateway services. Not many people are aware about the fact that SAT is an authorized training center that has exclusive rights not only to train ground handlers in Singapore, but also in 10 countries regionally. So as we speak, SATS is actually currently providing ground support and in-flight catering services to about 40 airports around Asia. And I think they can even, it has been also going as far as Dubai as well. So the Singapore government sees the opportunity for both local and foreign companies coming to Singapore to capitalize on how Singapore is an air hub and an aerospace hub as well. So with that, they are constantly encouraging small to medium companies to collaborate with such big players, SATS and Changi Airport Group, to really co-develop and export what we call designed in Singapore aviation products. Because of our reputation, it's a lot easier for us to expand further into other countries because of where we come from and where the product is being manufactured in. A lot of the SMEs in Singapore already have the capabilities to support such big organizations in terms of MRO services and even providing aerospace component parts. Moving forward to our food sector, not many people realize that 55% of Singaporeans actually eat out and they take away their food. So that's the reason why our F&B sector is really high and really prosperous, because we have restaurants, we have many hawker centers. But because of the current COVID situation, a lot of our F&B owners are suffering. So they saw this opportunity to actually leverage on technology solutions to help their customers still order food from them through online platforms and order groceries from them through online platforms and use delivery dispatch riders as well. So this is not just for the food sector, but for the IT sector as well. If there are technology solution providers that are keen to work with the F&B sector, this will be a really good time to come up with logistics solutions and delivery platforms that allows them to connect with their customers as much as possible. Some F&B companies actually use Singapore as a strategic position to expand further. A very good example is BreadTalk. BreadTalk has really managed to expand their business both locally and internationally, and they currently operate in 17 countries. And its brand portfolio really includes brands like Toastbox, Food Republic, and Din Tai Fung. So this really tells you that Singapore doesn't only bring in companies into Singapore, but we hone our local guys and we bring them out of Singapore as well, because Singapore is very well known to be a food paradise brand. And because of our strong reputation in food safety, food quality, it's really why companies like BreadTalk was able to expand and tap on that competitive advantage. Like I mentioned, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, Singapore's food supply could have been really affected if not for our stockpile. And because we import 90% of the food being consumed in this country, we are very open to the volatility of the global food market. So with that, it's a very concerning issue and the government recognizes that. And that's why they've agreed to set aside a $30 million grant for local farms to really ramp up their production of eggs, leafy vegetables, and fish. But yes, Singapore is very small. We don't have a lot of space to do things like this. So we invest in agri-tech solutions. We are helping a lot of hydroponics and aquaponic companies to really expand their capacity in this sector, because there is a very high need to do self-production, especially by 2025, because Singapore has made that aim to develop 30% self-production by that period. And moving forward to manufacturing, I mentioned earlier before, manufacturing is one of our largest sectors, but more specifically, advanced manufacturing is where the government is really focusing on right now. Advanced manufacturing is really a combination of machines and digital technologies like data analytics and artificial intelligence to really create what we call a smart factory, or in this case, Industry 4.0 model. So they're trying to get a lot of the manufacturing firms in Singapore to adopt this model to either increase productivity or even reduce costs as well. So some of the biggest names are already in the advanced manufacturing industry, like ABB and Siemens, who have already established their presence here in Singapore because of the abundance of resources and institutes and research facilities that we provide, and along with a high-skilled talent. Now, Singapore has also established an advanced remanufacturing technology center, which is really a place where you can test bid and develop manufacturing technologies. And it's really a consortium of a lot of the universities in Singapore and the industry partners that want to bridge that technology gap for a lot of the manufacturing companies that are local in Singapore to adopt an advanced remanufacturing process. So this really opens up a lot of opportunities for foreign companies to come into Singapore to provide this kind of technology, especially in advanced manufacturing, to local players that may not have the resources or may not have the knowledge, and work together with big players to really develop something that can be used even nationally. So before I end my presentation, I just wanted to really focus on these few things when you're doing business in Singapore. Yes, because foreign companies are able to leverage on FTAs in the ASEAN region, many companies use Singapore as a springboard to the neighboring countries while establishing their regional HQ here. Like I mentioned in previous slides, a lot of the decision making is actually made in Singapore, even if the project is being done in a different country. Like I mentioned earlier, with advanced manufacturing and smart factories on the rise, Singapore is really able to provide that conducive environment that you need in order to test bid and pilot projects, and it will lead up to bigger opportunities because in that same space, you're able to pitch to the many venture capitalist firms and the many investment firms here in Singapore to help you fund and launch your product here in Singapore and then in ASEAN. And of course, because of the influx of so many foreign companies and having such an open economy, doing business in Singapore can be very Western. I mean, we have 25 large MNC firms from globally and from the US that is based here in Singapore. So with that, we've become very Western in the way we do business. But it's very important to take the time to build relationships with local contacts here in Singapore. Very similar with a lot of the Asian countries. I'm sure that you've heard from other presentations done by my colleagues. Relationship building is something that's super important, especially when you're trying to do business in a local context. All right, so here's a quick recap on what we can do for you. Market research, business matching, as well as our market immersion program, and of course, helping you to expand to all the ASEAN markets because of all our regional offices and international partners in Asia. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me directly at my email or my contact details, or you can just drop your message in the question and answer panel. And thank you everyone for giving me the time and attention today for the past 20 minutes or so. I'll now pass on the time to Eric to continue his presentation and end off the webinar. Thank you so much. Eric?
Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you very much.
So, thank you.
Thank you. So without further ado, I will also start on the second part of the presentation today, which essentially talks about the main thing in terms of what are we looking at when it comes to setting up in Singapore. What are the key perspectives of Singapore setup when it comes to taxation and other benefits or considerations that you can enjoy. So earlier on, Dahlia has touched on a few key points in terms of national data. So which I will also add on as a key parts or some parts of this presentation. So very quickly in the 2 slides, a quick group snapshot of InCorp Group of company. So essentially, who we are is we are a regional corporate services provider or player in the market. We specialize in various forms of international market access, corporate compliance, accounting, taxation, immigration, where we look at talking about the work visas for some of your employees or for yourself if you are keen to relocate to any new markets that you want to relocate to. So again, we are present in 6.5 countries, I would say. Malaysia not inclusive, because Malaysia is a small back office of ours, but if you do need help in Malaysia, I'm sure our partner Orissa International will be able to point you in the right way. So across the region in all these countries, we have about 550 employees. We are existing partners with key government entities in Singapore, as well as some parts of these few countries that you see. So in terms of the overview of services that we can do, as earlier shared on, we are present again in 6 countries, Singapore with our headquarters, which includes our subsidiaries, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and India. So if you look at the semicircle or range or overview of services on the right-hand side, you can also see our full range of service. So we're telling all our clients that when you look at each of these markets and to do market entry or to expand your business into, we can pretty much cover whatever you need as a business entity, whatever you need in terms of reporting to the regulatory point of view, as well as doing a lot of structuring advisory, which also includes other forms of services that you might need, which includes trademark registration, which include license application, etc. So when we talk about Singapore, I think earlier on, Daniel, I shared a lot of Singapore data. I would like to cover a little bit more data again in terms of key metrics that look at in terms of Singapore. So a lot of these rankings come from World Bank rankings as well. So if you look at the table for Singapore, right, the time required to start the entity or start a business according to World Bank, or also according to current practice, right, minimally you need 1 day, but typically depending on the documentation required, I would say within 1 or 2 days we'll be able to set up an entity in Singapore. Overall World Bank ranking as a place of doing business, right, we rank very high in the world. We rank number 2 in the world. In terms of ease of starting a business, because again it is pretty fast and not so complex to set up an entity in Singapore, right, we rank number 4 in the world. Time required to enforce a contract, right, according to World Bank, it takes about 164 days, which I think compared to many of these key Asian markets or even globally in the world, 164 days or within around half a year or so is pretty fast, right, to go through the full legal process. And this is also important for all business owners or business players like all of you here today, that when you do business, you want to ensure that when you need to enforce a contract on the other party or the counterparty, you under the Singapore law, you are pretty much well covered in a very clear and transparent legal system. Time required to prepare and pay taxes, according to World Bank, on average basis as a company, you take an average of 64 hours in a year to prepare and file for your taxes, which is, I would say, pretty low compared to many parts of Asia. For example, Vietnam takes 400 over hours in a year, according to World Bank. Our corporate tax regime, which I'll share on later on in another slide, right, we adopt a flat 17% corporate tax rate in Singapore. This is pre-rebates, pre-exemptions that the government will give. Dividends tax is something that's interesting, right? It's taxed at 0% in Singapore. Our GST or VAT regime is at 7% now. Earlier on, pre-COVID, it should be 9% by 2021, 2025, but because of the COVID situation, this increase to 9% might take even longer beyond 2025. In terms of foreign ownership restrictions for Singapore companies, is a no, right? All companies in Singapore can be 100% foreign owned. In terms of restrictions or central bank regulations in banking, FX conversions, I would say generally it's quite a free market here in Singapore, and the government does not restrict a lot in these practices. In terms of Singapore strengths, or some of Singapore strengths, which I will cover in the next 3 slides or so. I think again for business owners who are considering Singapore as a place to do your business or expand your business, right? You want to know that we rank first in the world in political and operational stability, right? This is according to Cornell University and INSEAD. We rank 4th largest recipient, right, of FDI or foreign direct investments into Singapore in the world. So this is according to UN in 2019. So among in the world, we rank number 4 in the world and 1st in Asia. We also rank 2nd in the world and 1st in Asia for having the best IP protection. So again, this is also important for all business owners out there when it comes to IP protection, because you want to ensure that any brand name or any branding that built up in this part of the world, you have one of the best legal systems to protect your IP, your patents, and your trademarks. So in terms of investments, according to Euromoney, right, in 2019, we ranked 1st as one of the least risky countries to put your money into, right? If you want to invest, and we rank and you can see we rank amongst the top few European countries that you can see in the graph here. In terms of FDIs, according to industry data, right? Again, Singapore ranks very high in obtaining foreign direct investments from all around the world, and in comparison to the rest of Asia Pacific, as you can see. And I think this is one of the points that Dahlia has earlier brought on as well. So in terms of the other key benefits that Singapore will bring you as a business, right, I think it's largely covered in all these small little icons here. So I think I won't talk too much about why Singapore has a very strategic geographical location. Traveling to all the regional countries is fast and easy. Yeah, and I think for the main points here, I want to again highlight for business owners or businesses again is you will be attracted to Singapore because we have an advanced tech internet infrastructure. So when you set up a business here, everything is pretty much ready from the get-go. You will not have any issues in terms of technology or infrastructure or general infrastructure as a whole. The transparent, clear regulations, as well as the very strong legal and IP framework, again, is key for all businesses who want to do business here. Because again, when you want to do business, you want to ensure that the rules are clear, the rules are not gray or hidden, and you will know what is the can and cannot when you want to do business here in Singapore. So this is again important for all businesses out there. In terms of ease of access to investors, so again, if you're in the tech space, right, or you're in the tech startup space, you're looking to come to Singapore to seek out investors, right, among all the VCs and PE firms out here. Yes, it is easy to get access, or at least have a local access to all these institutional investors, because again, a lot of them are already set up in Singapore. So if you are a tech startup looking for your Series A, B, C funding, right, I think you will have a very strong chance if you are here. Of course, the tax regime is something that we cannot ignore, right? We have a very friendly corporate tax regime, as well as a personal tax regime per se. We are not the lowest tax regime or tax in terms of percentages. We are not the lowest in the world, but in the AAA rating country, we are one of the most competitive out there in the world. So other benefits again. So again, I've spoken about the investors portion. Why so many tech startups or so many companies are in Singapore, the set of the holding companies here in Singapore, because again, there is a very strong presence or preference for investors to want to form or fund a Singapore holding company, because there is no tax on the capital gains and there's no tax on dividends that's being declared by the Singapore company. And again, because legal framework is very strong, any shareholders agreement or share purchase agreement that's executed with the Singapore holding company will make it, I would say, more palatable to all these institutional investors. For B2B focused businesses out there, again, many MNCs or large MNCs of the world have their regional headquarters or global headquarters in Singapore alone, which also means that if you're targeting such companies as a way of wanting to partner with them, being your vendor or being your potential clients, you are pretty much assured that all these large MNCs with headquarters here, which also means that their APAC or Asia decision makers are also based here in Singapore. So you will have an easier chance to pitch for whatever you need to pitch as a business to all these big companies or large boys of the world. And of course, we cannot ignore the Singapore branding, right? The strong corporate image of Singapore as a Singapore company is very strong out there in the world. We are well recognized globally. And again, there's not many AAA rated countries in the world for you to do business other than Singapore. And again, to use as a leverage of using the Singapore branding to want to negotiate business terms with your vendors and customers, right? All the various legal frameworks as well as the branding will help you a little bit along the way. For tech startups, this is one slide that I want to show for aspiring or current tech startups out there. So according to Startup Genome and Crunchbase, a report that they do every year, in 2019, Singapore ranks number 14th in the world, right, as a place for startups to want to do business in, as a place of ecosystem that's available out there for startups, which covers key metrics like funding opportunities, like market reach, like connectiveness with the region or with the global pool. What is the talent pool out here? All right. So again, to be ranked number 14 in the world is pretty decent, I would say. And in the top 10, you can see only I think usual countries in Asia that you can see, like London, like Beijing and Shanghai are there. So other than that, within the top 25. Including Hong Kong, there's only these 4 Asian cities that rank very high in the startup ecosystem ranking. So how do you access Singapore then, right? So there are many legal entities that's available for foreign companies or for Singaporeans who are looking to set up companies here in Singapore, which is largely covered under this table. So I would say if your foreign company was contemplating or setting up in Singapore, right? But I think by far the most common legal type that you will set up will be this thing called a private limited company, of which the shares are of which the company is limited by shares. So in terms of the tax exemptions or the tax incentives or the tax rebates that the Singapore government gives to bulk of the companies here in Singapore, as a private limited company, you will be able to enjoy all of them, if not most of them. So for foreign companies wise, right, depending what modes or what purpose you wish to set up into Singapore on, there are other options out there other than a full subsidiary or private limited company that you can set up, which is mainly the branch or representative office. So in terms of recommended structures or common structures that we typically see or structure for our clients in Singapore alone, which I will go through the 4 main options here in this webinar. So if you look at option 1, right, which is I would say the most straightforward way of setting up a company here in Singapore, is a subsidiary structure, whereby depending where you're operating from overseas, right, your existing parent company or existing home company remains as the corporate shareholder, of which your investors or founders are the shareholders on the top, and then you simply set up a 100% foreign-owned company here in Singapore, as well as all your other global subsidiaries around. So this is, I would say, a very typical subsidiary structuring. Is recommended for if your business is keen to penetrate the Singapore local market or to test bait for new products in the region. Because again, Singapore is always a good place to test bait a product, and if it's successful, right, you can slowly bring it on to the regional markets from Singapore. In terms of option 2, this is a subsidiary plus regional or global headquarters structure, which is not too similar, not too different to option 1, but in this case, for larger companies out there, right, if you're a European American country, right, where you do not have any Asian presence now, you may want to consider using Singapore as a direct subsidiary one, as well as being your regional HQ, where you're going to house some of your key functions here, your Asia CEO, your Asia business development officer, your Asia technology or key functions or trading offices. So using Singapore as the holding company or regional holding company, you can then slowly spread out to all the subsidiaries or regional expansions within Asia itself. So as a P&L perspective, right, you can use the Singapore consolidated financials to have a good feel of how big is the Asian market for you as a business. And of course, being a Singapore company, you can leverage on Singapore's DTAs. I think in terms of double taxation agreements, Singapore has one of the most in the world signed globally. So as we speak now, we have 60 signed globally with 7 limited treaties that is already in place. In terms of option 3, we will look at individual separate companies. So depending on, again, the purpose or you wanting to set up here in Singapore, you can actually straightforward form another Singapore company that is not linked to an existing company in your home country. So this is also typical for many companies who want to set up something that's maybe in a different business line, or something that they want to separate from the existing home company business. For option 4, right, this is interesting per se, because in terms of what we call the holdco structure, or flipping of the holdco structure over. So you may be an existing overseas company right now, but because of branding, because of investors wanting you to set up Singapore holding structure instead, to own the rest of your business globally. This is where option 4, in loose terms, we call it the flip structure, whereby you make Singapore the holding company for the rest of all your entities globally. So of course, when you set up a new holding company structure and investors coming in, you will need to execute new shareholders agreement. And the benefits of this structure, again, is to take advantage of the capital gains, 0% capital gains tax here in Singapore, and 0% dividends tax in Singapore for the shareholders and for your investors. And if you need to transfer assets and business over to the home country, this structure will be easier as well. In terms of the criteria setting up a Singapore company, right? We call ACRA as our Singapore registrar here. So when you set up a Singapore company, it's just these five criteria that you need to consider. Number 1, you need one shareholder, of which 100% foreign ownership is allowed. Within the shareholder base, it can be an individual, it can be a corporate entity, or it can be a mixture of both. And every Singapore company, you will need at least one local resident director, of which this person has to be a Singapore citizen, a Singapore PR, or an employment pass holder, which is the most common work visa in Singapore, that works for this Singapore company. So for foreign companies who are looking to set up for the first time and do not have any team locally, right? They don't have any person locally. They can also make use of service providers, a service called the Nominee Director Service, to set up the company first. And every Singapore company will need a local registered address in Singapore. Again, if you is not looking to set up a physical office immediately when you set up the company, you have again the option of using your service provider office as a registered address. For paid up capital, right? Our registrar concept here is we need all shares when the company is formed to be all fully paid up. The minimum paid up capital that when you form a company is at only $1. So which means with $1, you can pretty much set up the company from the get-go, and it's also easy for you to increase capital from then on thereafter. So in this case, it gives a lot of flexibility to companies who are looking to, or businesses looking to set up entities here, to set up fast first, and then slowly infusing capital into the company. And of course, for the last criteria is every Singapore company will need a local resident company secretary, of which I would say majority of the Singapore companies here outsource it to a secretarial firm or service provider like InCorp, right? Where we being outsourced a company secretary to your company and ensuring you meet all annual compliances in Singapore. For the tax regime wise, so as earlier shared, we adopt a flat corporate tax rate of 70%. This is pre-rebates and pre-tax exemptions that the government gives every year. In terms of the two key tax exemption schemes available in Singapore, is broadly categorized into these two. As you can see in the top end of the table. One is called the Startup Tax Exemption Scheme, or SUTE for short. This is available to startups within the first 3 years from the date of incorporation, and it's only available to startups that is majority owned by individuals, right? Not corporate entities or not subsidiary structures. So from 2020 year assessment 2020 onwards, in your first 100,000 of net chargeable income, or in layman terms, your net profit, you have a 75% tax exemption on your first 100,000 of net profits, and for the next 100,000 of your net profits, you get a 50% tax exemption. So for subsidiaries or companies, Singapore companies with corporate shareholders, right? Or you have passed the first 3 years of their incorporation under the startup tax exemption scheme. All other companies will also get to enjoy this thing called the partial tax exemption, or PTE scheme for short. So it's slightly similar to the SUTE, just that your first 10,000 of net profit, you will have a 75% tax exemption. And then your subsequent 190,000 of net profit, you will have a 50% of tax exemption. So again, this is available to all companies out here, no matter whether you are largely corporate owned or largely individually owned, or a mixture of both. So with these two tax exemption schemes, it gives a lot of, I would say, certain tax savings to all companies out here. So if you take into account such tax exemption schemes that you have on your first 200,000 of net profit, your effective tax rate will not be 17% per se. Your effective tax rate will be much lower than 17%, maybe at around the 10% region if your net profit is just nice at 200,000. And of course, there are also various tax deduction schemes for qualifying R&D works, as well as IP works or IP costs that you incur in Singapore. So again, this is another benefit that the Singapore government wants to give to all companies who operate in Singapore, who wish to do R&D or register their IP in Singapore. So if you are doing R&D works here in Singapore and it's to the government that is qualified R&D work, right, you can claim tax exemption on the staff costs and consumables or other expenses incurred on these qualifying R&D projects for 250%, which means if you spend $1 on R&D works in Singapore, you can get back $2.5 on tax deduction, which is not too bad. For qualifying or for costs incurred for you to say register your trademark or register your patent in Singapore, for every $1 that you spend on IP works, you can claim back $2 on tax deduction. So again, this is very attractive again for many tech companies out there who wish to bring their patent or IP filings over to Singapore and be protected under Singapore law. And the government gives you a bit of tax deduction back to you. I will run through very quickly on this slide. So again, for everybody out there who is considering Singapore again, for annual compliance wise, it's straightforward per se. You just need to do your annual compliance on a yearly basis to two government entities. One to ACRA, which is our company registrar, of which you need to file for your annual returns, which includes your financials in Singapore, as well as hold your AGM on a yearly basis. So again, to help the smaller companies out there who want to reduce the cost of annual compliance, there is also an audited financials exemption scheme here in Singapore. So if you meet certain criteria, as seen here, you do not need to audit your financials. You can just file unaudited financials. So this reduces your cost, and you do not need to actually audit your accounts after your books has been prepared. And of course, to our Inland Revenue, which is our tax authority, on a yearly basis, you need to actually file for a corporate tax, which is November every calendar year. You will also need to register for GST if your revenue or your local revenue is more than $1 million. So which also means if you're a new startup in Singapore with not much revenue yet, you do not need to register for GST, which again reduces your cost and time to file for your taxes. In terms of, I think in the recent few months, a lot of businesses have been asking us on how is the Singapore government helping Singapore companies to combat the pandemic downturn? How, if I do expand my business or company into Singapore, will the government be helpful in times of crisis like this? So I think in this slide, I cover some of the main points to what the government has done for the last few months. What are the new regimes or new schemes that have been introduced to help Singapore companies to tide through the difficult period? So there are some certain auto-inclusive assistance schemes, of which the government is helping or subsidizing up to 75% of wages for employees for many months in Singapore. There is also an automatic deferment of corporate income tax, again to help companies cash flow to tide through this difficult period. The government also introduced risk-sharing loans, of which these loans are dispersed by the banks operating here in Singapore through various products. the government has taken a stand for every loan or every $100 that the bank is lending out under these schemes, right? If the company goes on a default, the government bears 90% of the risk. So this helps SMEs a lot because it gives the boost to all the banks out here to readily lend more, right, in times of crisis like this. There are also various assistance or grant schemes to help Singapore companies to expand out of Singapore. So if you are a Singapore company and you have minimum 30% Singaporean shareholding, you can take advantage of this market readiness grant to help you expand out of Singapore. If you want to do overseas market promotions, you want to do business development, you want to do trade shows, you want to do market setup costs, you can leverage on this MRA scheme to help you co-fund of these courses. Of course, there's another bigger grant called the Enterprise Development Grant, of which you can leverage on this grant, which finances up to 90% of eligible expenses when you are looking at either increasing your in-house capabilities, business capabilities in terms of innovation productivity, or you're looking at venturing overseas again to do overseas market access. And also to help a lot of the retailers out here or companies with commercial leases. The new law has also been passed very recently, right, that mandates all landlords in Singapore to pass on rental rebates or waivers to all their tenants, right, if certain criteria are met. So again, you can see the government is very active over the last few months to help Singapore companies or companies who are already in Singapore to tide through the difficult period. So even after this pandemic crisis is over, right, I think if you are setting up a company today, you're assured that if future crises or economic downturns happen again, I think the Singapore government will be more than keen to again introduce various schemes to help Singapore companies out here to survive. In terms of banking regulations, I'll run through very quickly on this, right? Our central bank is called MAS. The advantages of the central bank or banking regulations here in Singapore propels us to be a key financial hub in Singapore. So there's a wide selection of international and Singapore banks to choose from to work with if you are in Singapore. Borrowing cost generally in Singapore is ranked one of the highest, one of the lowest in the world. There is generally no restrictions in foreign exchange. That means you can freely exchange non-restricted or non-regulated currencies or the major currencies in Singapore without additional documents or submission to the government like some countries in Asia. So it makes it easy for you to receive and send money out of Singapore as well, which is again easy for you to do business. So as a financial hub or key financial hub in Asia, right? I think besides being recognized as a very established ecosystem for private wealth management and globally recognized with a AAA rating, there's again more than 10,000 finance professionals that are across all these different financial institutions, which includes the banks, the finance houses, the asset management firms, all the various PE/VC funds or family offices, single or multi-family offices. So in this case, if you are again here in Singapore, and depending what is your purpose of wanting to set up in Singapore, is it for your wealth preservation, or is it for wealth creation, or is it for fundraising for your business? I think you have again a wide reach to such institutional players. So if you are a very established and outstanding business owner with a very strong track record outside of Singapore, right? If you want to relocate to Singapore permanently, there is also this very customized scheme called the Global Investor Program that is administered by Singapore's Economic Development Board, of which we are attracting. There's an immediate PR scheme per se, if you meet the certain criteria that the government is giving. So again, this gives out a lot of options to very successful business owners or very wealthy families out there who are looking to shift their business or their money over to Singapore. So this is my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm conscious of the time, but I would like to leave out to the floor to essentially for Q&A. So maybe Dahlia, you want to show your face again on the webcam and see if you can take some questions here. So for everybody, I'm also introducing Sarah here. Sarah is also from Orissa International. She's the founder CEO. for the company. Also a very good partner of InCorp. So I thought it'd be good if you have questions that you can post in the Q&A tab. We will be more than happy to actually answer. So I think I've seen some questions that people has been asking us. So I think one participant did ask what are the issues and challenges to set up business in Singapore compared to neighboring countries such as Malaysia or Indonesia. Maybe Sarah, if you want to take on this question.
Okay, so I think I don't think it's a issues or challenges in terms of an apple-to-apple comparison. I think the kind of investments Singapore attracts has for many years been very different from the kind of investments countries like Malaysia or other countries in Southeast Asia tend to attract. I mean, the reality is investing in Singapore is very, very easy. It's very, very straightforward. There's no restriction to foreigners. So, I mean, as you will see from the World Bank rankings, we are, I think, number 1 or 2. Really, this is the easiest place in the world to set up a business. But the type of businesses we set up here will be different from perhaps companies wanting to set up in Malaysia, because I mean Singapore tends to attract more those kind of companies that are looking for to establish a regional HQ, or they're looking to tap onto some of the government schemes for R&D programs here, which is why Dyson set up not just their HQ here, but also their R&D center here. Clearly, Singapore is is a country where, look, labor is not easily available compared to some of the more emerging markets, and of course, labor costs here are much higher as well. So I would say that it just tends to attract a different type of company. It's not so much a labor-intensive manufacturing site, but more those HQs, financial businesses, and those looking at much higher value-added type businesses. That's what Singapore is probably better at than Malaysia or other countries.
Thank you. Maybe to add on to what Sarah has shared, I guess in terms of if you compare Singapore to Malaysia or Indonesia, I think from the legal standpoint or from the structuring standpoint, the purpose of why you want to go to these countries is important. What kind of business are you doing? What kind of products and services are you trying to do? Or are you simply looking at setting up a back office, for example? So Singapore versus the other countries, each of them have different benefits, strengths. Each of them have their weaknesses. So I think as a business owner, this is something that you need to consider. And again, you can reach out to myself or to Orissa International to see, for certain type of businesses, which country is more applicable in this case. So I see an interesting question, right? Due to the political situation in Hong Kong right now, if I want to relocate my business from Hong Kong to Singapore, which is a better option, to incorporate a new company or to buy over a shell company or to acquire? So Sarah, maybe I take this question first, or you want to take?
Best you take. It's best you take this question.
I'll pick this question because I think the topic has been on everybody's mouth as we speak. So again, if for existing Hong Kong players or companies out here who are looking to shift to Singapore, one is either for diversification of your risk. You want to go to a more political stable country to do your business, right? Like Singapore. I think yes, the one of the main options, yes, is to incorporate a new company. How do you want to do it? Well, there's various ways of doing it. You can either set up a brand new company here, get your shareholders and get investors in, bring and divert and novate your existing business contracts, your clients, your vendors over to the Singapore company, and then start doing business from here. And of course, you can think about relocating some of your sales or your key staff over to Singapore. And gradually wind down the Hong Kong company, again, depending what are the assets and liabilities on the Hong Kong books. So buying over a shell company or acquiring other companies in Singapore is also a quick way or a good way of entering the market straight away with an established team. So I think in terms of valuations, right? In this current market now, I would say valuations are slightly lower versus to pre-pandemic days. So for financially, I would say stable or strong companies out there who are keen to enter the market fast and you don't want to start greenfield, I think M&A is something that you should consider as well. That means buying over a Singapore company or investing into a Singapore company. Okay, let me see what other questions are there. So maybe this is interesting. Notwithstanding the COVID situation, the Singapore GDP growth over the past few years have been declining or just hovering at the 0% mark or near the 0% mark. So what is wrong with Singapore, right? So as investors or business owners, they are worried about the trend. Or is this something that we should be worried of, Sarah and Dahlia?
It's I mean it's an interesting and it's a fair question. I mean, you know, if you look at GDP growth here in Singapore, just after the US recession in the 2008-2009, I think it was in 2010, right? We had the highest growth rate in the world. Our GDP growth shot up to as high as I think 14%, if I'm not wrong, at one point. But you're right. I mean, the person who asked this question is right. I mean, in the last few years, it's very much been about a 2 plus 3% growth. I think what's happening is that it's also been a sort of a deliberate move on the part of the government here to sort of temper the growth of Singapore, because I think, you know, when we were growing very fast, we also had this issue of the fact that we had to some extent a labor shortage, at least in certain sectors, the need to bring in allow more when I say foreign workers, I'm not talking about migrant workers, but I'm talking about those in the white collar group working in the companies, the financial institutions, in the business district area. I think then for policy reasons and political reasons, I think they decided that they needed to temper that, and I think as a subsequent reaction, that impacted the growth of Singapore and has actually allowed it to reach to 2+%. I would say that, I mean, this was something that they knew would happen, and it's and this is the way they expect things to proceed. I mean, what our government says is that in essence, Singapore's growth is going to be very similar to developed countries' growth, like in US and in Europe, and that's part of what is going on here in terms of the way we are evolving.
Yeah, agree. I guess in terms of GDP growth, because we are a very developed market, we are not going to be like, you know, like the likes of India or the likes of China, whereby, you know, their economic growth is in the high single digits, or even for China, there are times it's double digit. But I think Singapore is too mature in the sense we will never be a very high single digit. We will be very happy if it is. And I think in terms of GDP growth, it's not it's just one metric to measure the country. It is not the entire consideration point for businesses out there who want to expand here. So again, the purpose of the business or what the type of solutions you want to bring into Singapore has many other considerations which I covered earlier on. So it's not just the GDP growth per se. I think I will pick up two questions that was asked for participants when they sign up for the webinar series. So one of this question, I think is also a hot topic as well. Is Singapore still a gateway to Asia, even with the current US-China trade war? And is our neighboring countries starting to ease on exporting their products and services? So I think maybe Sarah, this is a macro question, I would say. Is Singapore still a gateway to Asia?
I think,
even with the trade war?
I think when you say Singapore is a gateway, I mean, we are still seeing many projects where, for example, companies would like to partner with Singapore firms to cover the region. because they like the fact that if they can work with a company here to cover a larger market than having to work with individual companies in several markets, they find that easier. So to some extent, there is that situation that's developing. There is also the situation where more Singapores are in fact accelerating their expansion plans within Southeast Asia for that very reason, so they can be one organization covering multiple markets. Never mind US, China, I mean, now even with the Hong Kong situation, I think it's going to be interesting to see the trend whether there could be relocation of businesses from Hong Kong, where they are having some of their operations there, just like the earlier question you had, Eric, to Singapore. I mean, look, many companies with offices here will tell you they love being here. It's great, has a regional HQ, travel in and out, ease of doing business. So yes, I think it still remains to some extent, at least in certain sectors, that it is a gateway to the region.
And I think to add on to your point, I think despite what US and China has been fighting, or rather, seemingly China is trying to fight with everybody now in that sense. But I guess this puts Singapore in a stronger position versus another key Asia hub such as Hong Kong per se, because of the political stability here in Singapore. If foreign companies want to in China, or companies in US, or companies doing trading with both countries want to avoid this being in the political tug of war, right? Maybe having your trading entity or your main sales entity or your HQ entity based in Singapore gives you a very neutral point of view. Yeah. So I think in this case for businesses out there, Singapore, I would say, is politically neutral, right? The government typically wants to be friends with everybody. They will not say they're only pro-US. They won't say they're just pro-China per se. So we try to be friends with everybody to be good business partners. So I think for businesses who are afraid of the US-China trade war being exploding in its face, maybe trying to shift some of your business operations or revenue to Singapore, maybe a wise choice as well. So I'm conscious of the time, but I think that's our last question, Sarah and Dahlia.
Okay.
But so thank you everybody again for dialing in. This is the last webinar of our series. Thank you if you have been with us throughout this journey from June the 2nd. Again, after this webinar, we will be sending out email of all the video links or the video recordings of today's webinar as well. I think you have also been receiving emails from our previous webinars that was done that focuses on other countries, and you can see our contacts here on the screen here, and in the email you will also actually see our contact points. So feel free to reach out to InCorp or to Orissa if you have any questions or you want to start a conversation now on certain countries that you're considering. And yeah, so thank you very much, and
thank you, Eric. Thank you to your team.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye.